Sorry I haven't posted in a while. I just wanted this to be my return to video productions, but I got busy with other projects that aren't YouTube videos. And Jiminy Crickets, portfolios, essays, and tours ate up so much of my time, you know, college stuff. So without any further ado, let's get started. Joan of Arc. What can be said about her that hasn't been said already? A symbol of France, female empowerment, and an oddly common character in anime. But who was she really outside of a symbol? I mean, her name wasn't even Joan, it was Jean. Well, it seems best to start with Jean's childhood, because the nature of these videos being chronological and all together. Jean was the daughter of Isabelle Romée and Joan of Arc, and she had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. From what I've gathered, she was a very obedient and hard-working child. Her chores included very common chores for a girl of her status and time, being spinning, sewing, herding sheep, and milking the cattle. And when I said status, I just mean that her father was an influential figure in their town. She started hearing voices at the young age of 13, the first of which being on her right-hand side towards the local church. These voices included the angel Michael, Saint Margaret of Actium, Saint Catherine of Alexandria, and even God himself. These voices gave her moral guidance, and she kept them a secret at first from her family and such. And even by the standards of her village, she was an incredibly devout child, spending excessive time in confession and secretly swearing a vow of chastity. Anyway, her voices started urging Jean to help the Duke of Orleans defeat the English and the Burgundians, who were trying to take control of France. So Jean gave a tearful goodbye to her family and went to her cousin, Jean Laxis, in the town of Vercolor to help her, because Joan Laxis was married to a powerful man named Doron. I think it was like a mayor, basically. Then Doron brought Jean to another man, Robert de Ducus, who was something like a lord. Robert de Ducus agreed to listen to Joan because she was causing a bit of a stir in the town. So Robert gathered a traveling party of 6 men to protect her. He also gave Jean some clothes, including a tunic, hose, boots, and spurs, to protect her from any ill-mannered fellows who might wish to have their way with her, and of course to protect her from bandits, being under the disguise of a boy. And he also gave her a horse. Before they left the town, 2 noblemen wished to join their party, one of whom actually helped to fund the expedition. This is when she met Jean de Messis, her most loyal supporter, according to one source. The first part of their journey was 563.27 kilometers in Burgundian territory, so as an extra precaution they traveled at night, and as an extra precaution they avoided any settlements. But it wasn't much better when they finally arrived in Armagnac territory, due to the heavy rain and flooded rivers. Luckily for Jean, her experience with a cart horse was applicable to war horses, so she didn't have much trouble crossing the flooded river. Eventually, they did take a pit stop in the town of Fouillebois, where they wrote a letter to Charles, Duke of Orleans, alerting him of Jean's desire to have a meeting with him. So Jean went to the chapel of St. Catherine, where she prayed at the shrine of POWs, basically. The walls were decorated with swords and armor left behind by grateful soldiers who were thanking the saint for freeing them from imprisonment. Does that make sense? And there she found a sword behind an altar, revealed to her in the previous vision. And the monks just let her keep the sword. Wonder how many indulgences that would have cost. 11 days later, they arrived in Chien, where Jean was greeted by a crowd of onlookers, amazed by the wonders made
saved by a virgin from the young forest of Lorraine.
Many thought Jean to be the Virgin and the woman to be Queen Isabel, because Queen Isabel joined the Burgundians and kicked the Armagnacs out of Paris, including her son Charles Dauphin, who would rightfully be heir to the throne. However, Isabella joined sides with John the Fearless on the side of the Burgundians. So during a peace talk between Charles the Dauphin and the Duke John the Fearless, John was killed, and everybody thought it was Charles the Dauphin's doing, but we're not sure. Charles' parents disowned him and put Henry V on the throne. Following the disownment of Charles the Dauphin, both Charles IV and Henry V died, leaving Henry V's 9-year-old son as heir. And you can't exactly have a baby as the sole monarch of a country, and Charles does have the proper bloodline. So it's easy to see why people blame Isabella for this whole succession crisis. But soon, Jean was to meet the son of Isabella, Charles the Dauphin. Charles, the Duke of Orleans. According to folklore, when Jean and her friends reached the gate, a guard made some sort of rude remark, and in response, Jean... In addition, you might be asking, why do Skeletober at all? And it's very simple. Then, within the hour, he fell into the moat and drowned. What is it with folklore and saints getting the big man upstairs to be their hitman? Like, it's weird that it happened in the St. Patrick's Day video too, right? Now entering the palace, imagine yourself as Jean. A humble peasant girl from some podunk farming village, walking into the palace of the prince in the middle of festivities, colors and sounds you've never seen or heard before, the smells of food and perfumes, the best money that can buy, a rush of new sensations and sights, like stepping onto an alien planet. And you have to fight through all of that to speak to your king, who, if he wanted to, could have you executed for any reason at any time. Now you might be wondering, what is Skeletober? Let alone having to bother a king. Then on top of that, they made her play a guessing game. She had to guess which of the men in the room was the Duke, but she knew immediately by his... He pointed to another. I am not the king, here is the... By God, gentle prince, it's you and none other, true heir of France and the king's son. Then Jean explained her plans to Charles. Very basically, go to Reims, where the kings of France were crowned for like 1,600 years at that point. And then, yeah, that makes sense. They had like ancient tribes and junk. Okay. Very basically, they had to go to Reims, where kings of France were traditionally crowned for like 106 years at that point. Then, that will add legitimacy to his reign. Small problem, Orleans was surrounded by the Burgundians. So getting to Reims would be a huge gamble, and he needed to make sure that Jean was trustworthy. So she undergoes what is called the Examination of Pieties, where the Council of Chaume scholars would ask her a bunch of stuff, and like a week after, they determined she was good to go. But I bet you're wondering how one determines the spiritual health of a complete stranger. Well, you can't really, but this is what they did. First they wanted to make sure Jean was in fact a maid, as she marked herself as such to play into the whole prophecy thing. So, you know, some nuns and noble women took Jean to a private area to check her, and they said she was fine. So, then some theologians asked her about her own personal spiritual beliefs, looking for any orthodox or heretical, or whether or not her beliefs were at all satanic in some way. For it was believed that one could receive visions from angels, demons could also pretend to be angels, for they were once angels. And perhaps a demon was using Jean to set up some sort of disaster. And at one point they even demanded she perform some kind of miracle to prove that she was in fact holy. Which understandably frustrated Joan, because she's a human being and has no control over miracles. Only God can perform such feats, and Jesus. Only they determined that she was honest and believed what she said, and that her beliefs were orthodox, but they couldn't determine if she was conspiring with demons in this examination. But they had a great plan. A trial by fire. By which I mean, they would send her to Orleans, and if she succeeded, then she was indeed on a holy quest. If not, then all they would lose is Jean's armor and horse, but also her legendary banner, adorned with an image of Jesus Christ betwixt two angels, and behind him a rainbow, a symbol of peace, and also the words L'Épouse Marie, meaning Jesus and Mary in French. Also the symbol of the fleur-de-lis, which has a long history in and of itself, but for our purposes it is representative of French independence and was recently revamped in this time period by Charles Dauphin into the more modern form, with representing the Holy Trinity. Jean is probably one of my favorite generals of all time. First off, she set the same standard for her army that she had for herself. They were not to use foul language. Attendance at church was mandatory, and when girls came to flirt with the soldiers at their camp, Jean would turn them away. Furthermore, unlike those hypocritical crusaders, Jean understood that a holy quest in the name of our good Lord, who preached love, kindness, and understanding, probably wouldn't want an army in his name committing the grievous sin of murder. So her plan was that she would first plead with the Burgundians to surrender, for she was on a holy quest, and, you know, they would have the wrath of God brought down upon them. So basically... However, the other generals on Jean's team were a bit more cautious, and they just wanted to use Jean as a mascot to boost morale and keep Jean out of the way so she wouldn't risk having her head blown off with a cannon like their previous commander. But Jean was eventually allowed to join in the battle. And when the Burgundians still chose violence, Jean would then switch gears to a full focused frontal attack. No need to be sneaky when you have God on your side. And this strategy actually worked.
For example, the Battle of Orleans, where...
After pleading with the Burgundians to surrender, she was shot in the chest right above her heart, and then fell from a great height. Luckily, by some miracle, she was able to survive this wound, and they won the battle.
After defeating the English and the Burgundians and bringing Charles to Rheims, he could finally be coronated as the rightful king of France. On the 16th of July, Jean arrived at Rheims with her army, and there she was reunited with her parents after so long. They finally saw their daughter once again, as now a hero to the king himself. Her town thought that Jean was truly blessed after hearing all about her many miraculous victories. She insisted that she had no miraculous power, but still took a crack at it just in case something would happen. During the coronation, Charles's head was anointed with a sacred oil that has been said to have descended from heaven and was used in other coronations, I would assume, in order to add more legitimacy to his reign. Jean and her parents, of course, were in attendance, as well as Jean's banner, for, according to her, it also shared in the... And that is part 1 of the story of Joan of Arc. Wait for part 2, where I will be discussing her trial and hopefully her legacy. Wait for part 2, where I will be discussing her trial and hopefully her legacy.